Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and it's been about a year and a half, more than that even, since we last spoke of Brazil, but we know we have Brazilian viewers, and I think it's important that we go into this story because there is a lot of headlines that are coming out regarding the Brazilian central bank and the emerging markets, etc. As this Bloomberg article says, El-Erian warns Brazil may be next emerging market domino to fall. And as the article goes into, first Argentina, then Turkey. Could Brazil be next? Mohamed El-Erian hinted at exactly that as a Brazilian real led major currency losses Wednesday, even after the nation's central bank offered $1.5 billion in extra swap contracts to keep it above water. Brazilian policymakers are in a quote-unquote tricky position, and there is little room for error, El-Erian, the chief economic advisor to Allianz SE and a Bloomberg opinion contributor, wrote on Twitter, and you could see this chart right here. And it goes on to say the central bank's intervention followed similar actions by central bankers in Argentina, Turkey, India, and Indonesia. While India and Indonesia have curbed some of their losses, currencies in Argentina, Turkey, and now Brazil remain in precarious positions with world-leading sell-offs this year. And El-Erian first made a warning regarding the asset class last month, and Harvard economist Carmen Reinhardt said the risks are climbing as well. And, okay, so the academics and all these people talk about it, and they always they start to explain a part of an issue, but then they don't explain the whole issue. And that is what many of us might call a limited hangout. That's what the CIA calls it anyway. And I think it's important that we go into what exactly is happening in Brazil and this idea of these swaps from the central banks and what's actually happening in places like Argentina and other places, which we've recently reported on. And let's just say it's a disaster. It's the end result of centralization, vast centralization. John, what do you think about what's going on in Brazil?
Well, I think what's happening in Brazil has a lot to do with the massive corruption and fascism that's going on in Brazil. It's a very fascist country. We saw that, through, we actually talked about it during the Olympics. They had
booting people out of the houses.
Well, they had the acting, that too. And then they had the acting prime minister. They didn't even have the prime minister because the current prime minister, he was in jail for some kind of bribery or whatever it was. But it's just pretty hilarious when you see that side. And then, of course, you got to look at the currency. The currency has dropped. Just over the last 10 years, it's dropped 56% in value to the US dollar. So that's another big thing that has happened, of course, in Brazil, that they're losing a lot with their real, their currency that they have. And then the central bank's balance sheet. I took a look at the central bank's balance sheet. And of course, since 2005, it's gone up almost 600%. That means that they've been doing the same kind of scheme that every central bank around the world has. They've been buying up bad debt from everybody. So that's a bad one. And then I actually recently heard about in Norway, there's of course the companies that are working in the oil sector in Brazil. There's been a lot of scandals there that they've dealt with. So you just see a huge problem with corporate fascism in Brazil. That is, of course, the major thing. And then, of course, we had a video that we said, they just put in to have 20 years of austerity in Brazil. And now let me talk about the austerity for a second, because I find austerity is, there's a lot of people say, yeah, austerity doesn't work. Yeah, hell no, it doesn't work, because what you did is you just made people all depend on the government, and then you say, oh, I'm going to take it away from you to make you obedient to me. Of course, people are right, because now they become dependent on you, and then they want to fight back because they want their free stuff back that you gave to them.
Yeah, it's like reverse psychology almost, and it causes so many huge problems because that's exactly what state depends on, is dependence, and same with the banking system. And all these people fall into this chaos. They depend on the government, they depend on the banking system, but they can't take care of themselves, and then it's all taken away, and then they go scrambling in the streets trying to get back that dependence, instead of becoming an independent, free human being, intrinsically free, truly free, not a product or a cattle for the state to slaughter, which is something that happens so often, which is that, these guys are in this field like cattle and they're eating their grass and they're like, everything's so good because we have whatever we could possibly ask for. We feel so free. Meanwhile, they're surrounded by a cage and they're eating that grass, and they're real happy with that grass until they're led off to the slaughter with a smile on their face. And what's next? Well, I guess more division, more riots, more killing, more death and destruction, and then right back to square one, which is more dependence on the state and banking system. It's that centralization tactic that repeats over and over again because government is dependent on your dependence and bases the entirety of their structure on the extortion of the masses, the lying to the masses, the death and destruction and division among the masses, so the masses infight rather than fight the real enemy, which is government itself.
Well, here's the solution. How about you actually have a real government austerity and you cut the government, not just the services that you provide to people. You actually cut the government in itself and get rid of all the government, all the overblown government that you have in all these places, all these bureaucrats, running around thinking that they run the world. Meanwhile, we don't even need them if we actually understood how we can self-govern ourselves. So it's just very frustrating probably for people that are living there. And
the free market is a beautiful thing.
Yeah, in Brazil, they're known for a lot of violence there as well as Venezuela, of course. So they have a very high violence rate. And the problem is majorly is the corruption. And of course, the corruption starts from top with the central bank printing money out of thin air together with the banks, the local banks in Brazil. And that is the major scheme here. Of course, you have American banks around there, specifically like Citibank. Citibank is known, in Argentina. They really hate it there because they screwed over a lot of people all over time. And they continue the same thing. And that's why you see with Venezuela, they put out an executive order because the banks are in problem, not these official per se that they're talking about that they're trying to put sanctions on. It's actually their banks that are there. They're desperately trying to not have in Venezuela default on their debt because then it would be cascading into a couple of American banks. So this is just what they have. They're all in these Southern American markets, these American banks, and are doing a lot of bad schemes. And of course, the IMF is in there borrowing money, and then it was crazy in Brazil. You got to remember they had the Olympics and then they had the World Championships right after each other. And the government didn't have money in the first place to start with. And then they had those two massive spending binges. And now they're just on the verge of bankruptcy.
Which people are pissed off after they booted them out of their homes into the streets with the Olympics coming to town, which is totally insane. And, that's a good way to cause some riots.
Yeah, and usually you have, of course, the Brazilian public. They love their soccer team, their Brazilian soccer team.
The football.
Yeah, football team, as we call it in Norway. And of course, Norway beat Brazil and hasn't lost against Brazil. I got to mention that. It's very important. But anyways, they have a big problem there. When they had the World Championships, they weren't very excited about it anymore because they saw all the money being spent and just taken away from, providing to their own people. Now, the problem here is, again, we can say it repeated. It's like a broken record. The government is bad. The government always creates all these things. And the government, if the government wasn't there, you wouldn't have corporate fascism because the corporations would have to rely on, the free market and the people.
Well, there wouldn't be corporations. There'd be businesses. They wouldn't be incorporated. That's one of the great things is that individuals would decide with the demand of their dollar or real, or actually, let's get right out of that and into competing currency systems instead of depending on legal tender notes that force people into poverty and force inflation and debt onto the populace. But the free market would decide things as you as an individual instead of 51% deciding what the fate of 49% at the point of a gun. Instead, you have individuals voting with their dollar and businesses competing for the best quality, for the best price, innovating the market, creating new cures for diseases, prices going down, employment going up, real competition, and then obviously the ability for people to succeed at a far greater scale. Of course, equality of opportunity, not equality of results. Equality of results is socialism, where you end up with all these problems in the first place, where it's a problem, reaction, solution, repeat Hegelian dialectic, which just goes on forever and perpetuates forever. So folks, it comes down to you as an independent, free human being, being independent, being self-sustainable, being able to be financially responsible. For responsibility is a hallmark of freedom itself, and look towards food, water, shelter, self-defense. You're not gathering things for the toughest guy on the block. Of course, gold, silver, cryptocurrencies that have fundamental value. Do your own due diligence. This is our opinion, not investment advice, but of course, it's so important that people do that, their own due diligence. Don't just listen to us. Understand money, because if you understand money, you control money. If you don't understand money, that money controls you, and then you become a debt slave and you become dependent on the state and the banking system. So folks, please read into this kind of stuff, understand it. The people of Brazil, it's been a long fighting country, a very strong country, a very strong people living in Brazil, and historically independent, currently very dependent generally. So I think it's important that people understand these issues and are able to break free as a free individual and not succumb to, the glory of being completely dependent on the state and banking system for a bit of temporary, quote-unquote, free things that are extorted from other people, but long-term, complete demise and destruction.
Yeah, I think I just want to say one last thing, and this came to me because I just recently posted on Facebook a meme, a new drinking game that came out, and we should start having this in every country, where we have, when the socialist governments and politicians out there mention it's free, in a speech, that should, you should drink. You get basically pretty quick with that one, and I think that this one was about Bernie Sanders, of course. Josh could show it on the screen. It's pretty funny. Yeah.
Free or socialized? Drink up every time one of them says one of these things. I think we'd be dead of alcohol poisoning pretty fast. So thanks for going into this with us, John. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth,
be the change.
Like what you see here, WAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so overwhelmingly demonetized and censored by YouTube, as the ADL comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. Also, check our Bitcoin address in the description as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also find us at steemit.com at Josh Sigurdson, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post in Steem, the cryptocurrency. And also find us at the Red Pill Expo, which we have a reference link for below in the description and the comments as well. Hosted by G. Edward Griffin, amazing speakers coming out to speak this year. Don't miss it. It's in Spokane, Washington, June 21st to 23rd. We hope to see you there. But until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.